remind me to put this back up. Happy to be back in Ecclesiastes. This might be the only time you've ever heard anybody say they were happy to be in Ecclesiastes. But here we are, and so I'm going to continue on in Ecclesiastes 7, starting with chapter 7 today. But today is April 30th, and it was on this date in 311 AD that the Roman Emperor Galerius proclaimed the Edict of Toleration. And the Edict of Toleration was the Roman rule that ended the persecution of Christians in Rome. As you may or may not recall, there was around this time there were actually a couple of two or three rulers, of whom Constantine was one. There was kind of a triumvirate, and then they all kind of died off, and Constantine was left. But Galerius was one of the three, and he's the one that is credited with promoting this. And then Christianity does not become the actual state religion of Rome until about 50 years later, somewhere 360, 375. I forget exactly when that was. But it was on this date in 418 that the Roman Emperor Honorius banished Pelagians from Rome as a threat to peace. Now, Pelagians were followers of a guy named Pelagius, a priest named Pelagius, and Pelagius believed and taught that the original sin had not affected humans, and that everybody was free to decide to become a believer or however they wanted to live, which essentially, and then how you live depended on what your eternal reward was. Clearly kind of a scales, works-based sort of approach to salvation. And there are some that argue that Pelagianism, that a modified version of Pelagianism, where it's a combination of faith and works, is commonly referred to as semi-Pelagianism, is still around today, and in the Catholic doctrine, idea of salvation. Now, I don't think that a Catholic would say, "Oh yeah, we're semi-Pelagians." That is how, grace people would look at the Catholic doctrine and say, semi-Pelagianism. But it was on this date in 418 that Honorius did that. In 1803, Robert Livingston and James Monroe signed the Louisiana Purchase Treaty at a cost of $15 million to the United States, doubled the size of the United States, and the ground that we are standing on right now was part of that. So as a result of that, we are here today speaking English instead of speaking French. So that happened on this date in 1803. In 1854, James Montgomery died. I know, terrible. James Montgomery, best known for writing the song "Angels from the Realms of Glory," hymn writer. Let's see, and then two other things. On this date in 1900, Casey Jones died. And I will confess that either I never knew or did not know or had forgotten until today that Casey Jones was an actual person. I had just always kind of figured, I knew there was a song. Yeah, I always knew it was a song, and I knew that the Casey Jones and Railroad and all that kind of stuff. But no, he was in fact a very real person, a well-known train engineer that actually had done had been instrumental at the World's Exposition in 1893 here in Chicago, and was well known for keeping. His claim to fame was his punctuality, that he was able to keep to his schedules, and he did this by driving the train fast. And so one day he's driving the train into Mississippi, and there was a stalled train on the track. And so he was able to stop his train. He found out soon enough that he was able to stop his train such that it avoided massive deaths, but he, being in the engine compartment of the train, ended up dying. So he died on this date in 1900. And the train he was driving was called the Cannonball Express. So that was the nickname of the train itself. And finally, it was on this date in 1926 that Bessie Coleman died. Bessie Coleman died at the age of 34, fell from a plane. Okay, not a plane crash. She was an air acrobat. She was the first African-American woman to get a pilot's license in the U.S., but she was practicing and fell out of a plane to her death. And of course, we all know Bessie Coleman because that's the name of the road that O'Hare Airport is on, Bessie Coleman Drive. It's named after her. But she died on this date in 1926. So with that, we're going to get back into talking about Ecclesiastes. And remember, as we're talking about Ecclesiastes, Ecclesiastes is not a book that you're going to read and find a life verse from. Or if you do, I've got questions. Okay? It's a book that gives an example or an observations of what is life like when, without the idea of a covenant God. And I look at it as like wisdom in a deistic world. Deism being that approach to life where you say, yes, of course there's a God. I mean, Qohelet never says there is not a God. He clearly says over and over again, God did this. But God does not interact. God does not affect me. God doesn't, kind of just, the master clockmaker, just kind of turn the clock and let it go kind of thing. We have a certain set of responsibilities to him, but other than that, we're free to do whatever we want to do. And it isn't, some of the things, as you look through Ecclesiastes, you say to yourself, well, yeah, some of this still seems true. And that may be indicative that we are still living in a world that is practically deistic, in that, what we say and what we do are two different things. I read there was an article several years ago, I forgot who wrote it, where the author was talking about practical atheism. And his idea was that, we got a lot of people in our churches who are practical atheists. That, they go to church, but as far as whether it really matters to them, what's happening there, they might as well be atheists. Might as well stay home and do whatever it is people who stay home on Sunday morning do, which I've got limited experience doing, so I don't. It's an interesting thought. What do kind of like the if you've ever seen Camelot, like what do the simple folk do? Help them escape. I want to create a song. Like what do the people at home on Sunday morning do? I get that there are people that are housebound and the like, but.
Before you wax out in song, do you have any more? Let's spin the blank hand out.
For you, I do. Ha! You one or two? I'm sorry. Yes.
Okay, so how did this thought, not a personal God, develop? Because God had a relationship with Abraham and Moses, and there's this interaction even with Solomon, who asked for wisdom. Is it because of bringing in the other religions? How does this stream of thought have such sway that it's here in the...
Well, that might be the point that the author is trying to make. That it could be hypothetical. It could be saying that, well, this is why you need the covenant God, because this is the best you get without it. It could also, and we might touch on that as we get down to the stupidity of wickedness and the madness of folly later on in the chapter. And there is always the question, like, if Solomon was so wise, why did he end up the way he ended up? Because he basically ended up an infidel, worshiping idols. Certainly not David. Okay, even though the kingdom of Israel was at its most powerful, its most influential under Solomon, you never, in the New Testament, they never say, oh yes, our father Solomon. So it's our father David. Okay, David had his issues too. Don't get me wrong. I'm not trying to minimize David, but at least David was at probably to the end of his life was at least sensitive to how God was working in his life. Whereas I don't think Solomon was. He certainly was at the beginning of his life, his rule at least, but not by the end. And so again, in this book, you have a framed narrator. You have somebody who has set up this story. It's like, and I'm going to in the beginning and the end, and it's important to bring that up because the framed narrator is going to reappear today. Okay, so there's a second person who's presenting to you the story of Qohelet. Here's what Qohelet has to say, and Qohelet may or may not be Solomon. It could be Solomon. If it's not Solomon, the framed narrator or the writer of the book certainly wants you to believe that it is. Okay, and I've gone on, and you know, good people differ. You know, I have my opinion, and then everyone else is wrong. But I'm just kidding. I tend toward the it's not Solomon, and we'll talk about that a little bit today. Again, that it's not actually Solomon, but it's somebody who wants you to think this is what Solomon would have said at the peak of his power, kind of looking back, reflecting on his life. So we're also into the second half of the book, okay? And when you get into the second half of the book, the first half of the book, Qohelet is dealing mostly with this whole concept of meaningless, Hebel, as he talks about over and over again. Hebel, that's meaningless. It's everything, vanity of vanities, meaningless. Hebel, Hebel of Hebel. And in the last half of the book, he doesn't completely drop that, but he moves more into a series of proverbs and wisdom kind of things, more similar to what we're used to from Proverbs. Okay, there's still there's still mentions of it. It's still kind of in the context of this deistic worldview, this idea that there's a creator God. Because again, when Qohelet uses the word God or refers to God, he's referring to the creator God, not to the covenant God, the Elohim as opposed to the Yahweh from the Old Testament. And so in verse 7, or in chapter 7, beginning with verse 1, he's going to begin using these better than proverbs. That's your first thing, these better than proverbs, which is a fairly common structure. You know, better to live in the corner of a housetop than in a right house with a brawling woman in a right house. Better. One of my favorite ones. Not that I refer to it on occasion, but better to live in the corner of the housetop than with a brawling woman in a White House. That's it. That's one of the proverbs. That's an actual proverb in Proverbs. But he uses those here. And beginning in verse 1, a good name is better than fine perfume, and the day of death better than the day of birth. Okay, so a good name is better than fine perfume. Okay, now compare that to Proverbs 22:1, where it's a good name is better than riches. Great, wait, I had it. Proverbs 22:1, which says exactly, a good name is more desirable than great riches. To be esteemed is better than silver or gold. Okay, so again, you kind of have the same idea in this even in Qohelet's worldview, you have this idea, well, it's a good thing to have a good name. There's a couple of Shakespeare plays, 2 or 3, or 4, where the most interesting character in the play is not the person who the play is named after. Okay, so you think, like if you're going to go see Julius Caesar, you think, well, you know, we're going to see Julius Caesar, and it's a great thing to play Julius Caesar. It isn't really, okay, because Julius Caesar is dead by about a third of the way through the play. Okay, so Julius Caesar is not the most interesting character in Julius Caesar, and in the play Othello, the most interesting character is not Othello. The most interesting character is Iago. And what Iago does is he is somebody who is spurned for promotion, and so he decides that he's going to get his revenge on pretty much everybody. And so he sets in motion a series of events that's going to lead to the downfall of everybody that has done him wrong. And in the course of this, his machinations, he set up this accusation against this guy Cassio, and he's like, oh, I don't really want to say anything, and Othello is like, tell me, and so he's hesitant. Iago is saying this, and he says, he says, good name in man and woman, dear my Lord, is the immediate jewel of their souls. A good name in man and woman is the immediate jewel of their souls. Who steals my purse steals trash. 'Tis something, nothing. 'Twas mine, 'tis his, and has been slave to thousand. But he that filches from me my good name robs me of that which not enriches him and makes me poor indeed. Okay, and so you think about it, wow, that's great, But then again, the irony, of course, is that Iago is a really rotten person. He turns out to be a very rotten person. My opinion is, as far as Iago goes, and who's seen Iago? Othello? Anyone? That Iago was a very honest person and just snaps. Just figures, because that's how he gets away with it. Everybody believes him. The only way everybody's going to believe him is if he... Yeah, he has a good name, But here he's sitting there deliberately sabotaging this guy while piously talking about how important a good name is. But again, it's kind of the same idea, the wording, the idea that forget the context and all, but from Othello. But it's the same idea. Wisdom, a good name is better than fine perfume, and the day of death better than the day of birth. Okay. Now, you think about it, given a choice, again, dealing with a lot of people passing away, what do you think would be more happy to deal with? Somebody's birth announcement, or a death announcement? We would think, well, normal people would be more happy with a birth announcement, right? But again, think of this idea of and I'm going to get to it later on, where Qohelet is talking about just his jaundiced view, his world weariness. That's going to come in later, okay? This idea of, man, everything is just hebel. And at least when you're dead, you don't have to worry about it anymore. You don't have to, that's why, it's just better, And again, this is not a new idea for him. I mean, he said earlier that, better... remember what he said, that better the child that has never been born than the one who is born. Okay, so again, he's got this very dismal approach to things, and he says the day of death is better than the day of birth. Okay, it is better to go to a house of mourning than to go to a house of feasting. Okay, but again, so given a choice between going to a funeral or a party, so that's your two choices. We can go, what do you want to do today, dear? Well, there's a funeral over there, and there's a birthday party over there, which either one is fine with me, which you want to go to. How many of you are going to choose the funeral? Some of us might. I don't know.
It depends.
Yeah, but it's like, which would you more want to go to? I guess would be the way to put it. Which would you enjoy more? So. Then to go to, and so here he's saying, yeah, but at least when you go to mourning, you go to a house of mourning, when you go to a funeral, at least, that person doesn't have to worry about this hebel life we're all stuck with. Okay? For death is the destiny of everyone. The living should take this to heart. Okay? So again, here this is that we're all going to die someday. You can't take it with you. And again, this is not in 2:16 he says? 2:16 he says, for the wise, like the fool, will not long be remembered. The days have already come when both have been forgotten. Like the fool, the wise too must die. And then in 3, in that famous, there's a time for everything, a time to be born and a time to die. Okay? So here is like, again, Qohelet would be a fun guy at a party, The kid comes up and says, yeah, I'm 4 years old, Uncle Qohelet. What did you get me? Well, I'm going to tell you something. I'm going to give you a little advice. You're going to die someday. Okay? No doubt, a riot to have at a party. All right? But, he's like looking at it, wow, this life is just, even with all, again, and Qohelet is representing, either is or represents somebody who has it all. Okay? This is not somebody you compare this to Job, who has lost everything. And I think that's kind of an interesting contrast. I just thought of that. Kind of an interesting contrast. You look at Job, who had everything, lost it, and is still praising God. Okay? Qohelet has everything, and it's like, man, this is the pits. Okay, the living should take this to heart. Okay, and I suppose there's a certain amount of truth to that. We're not all going to live forever. Debbie might, I don't know. Okay, but it's like we're not all going to live together. No, please, no. We're not all going to live forever. At least, not on the earth. So, verse 3, frustration is better than laughter because a sad face is good for the heart. Now, for those of us who have a tendency not to smile, okay, this is a congenital family thing. I one time kind of had a picture of my grandfather, and a picture of my dad, and a picture of me, and a picture of Roscoe, my older son. Just lined us all up, kind of made them look the same. And we all have the same I'm mad at the world expression. I'm sorry, okay? Again, doesn't mean I'm not happy. It's just when I smile, I think I look guilty kind of thing. So it's like if I smile, Debbie's like, what did you do? So it's like, but here he says, a sad face is good for the heart. This is interesting because this is going to come back later. Again, Qohelet, this is almost like a stream of consciousness because Qohelet says these things, and then later he's going to say something that's like, wait a minute. Because at the end of the chapter, he's going to say, yeah, go ahead and smile. It's a good thing. It's like, wait a minute, make up your mind. Okay? But here, so why would a sad face be good for the heart? What is it? Good for the heart? Well, perhaps it's because it forces contemplation. So the 4-year-old comes up to Uncle Qohelet and says, why do you look so sad? Well, I'm just worried that you're going to die someday. Well, okay, great. You've put that in the head of the 4-year-old, and so now, he or she is going to have a lifetime of therapy to deal with that, but at least they're thinking about it. I'm not suggesting you do that. So if any of you are going to a birthday party this afternoon, please do not remind the person of their mortality. The heart of the wise, and again, he's still on, where am I here? Death to Q. A good name is better than fine perfume. Death to Qohelet is the destiny of everyone. How is a sad face good for the heart? Well, it forces contemplation. Forces contemplation. The heart of the wise is in the house of mourning, but the heart of fools is in the house of pleasure. It is better to heed the rebuke of a wise person than to listen to the song of fools. Like the crackling of thorns under the pot, so too is the laughter of fools. This too is meaningless. Okay, again, we're returning to this whole idea of Hebel. And this idea of the sound of crackling of thorns under the pot. It's like, how many of you still have a real wood burning fireplace? Okay, so we have a real wood burning fireplace, and and of course, having been a Boy Scout and a Boy Scout leader, I think I've told tales of my pyromaniac tendencies. I'll edit this part out of the video. No, where I confess to being a pyromaniac. But see, I'm smiling. It's because I'm guilty. One of the things you learn is that if you put pine in, pine is a soft wood, okay, and it lights up real fast. Like if you burn a 2x4, 2x4s are great. 2x4s burn great. You throw them in there, they light up real fast, okay, and they're loud. There's a lot of popping, snapping. It's the moisture in there that is, and they're also burn real quick. Whereas if you put in, like oak or cherry or some hardwood, it doesn't make as much noise, but it burns much longer. So I think there's when you hear a lot of snapping and popping in your fire, that it's going to burn out real quick. Relatively speaking, not like 10 seconds, but as opposed to you're going to be getting up. So again, and I having done various house projects over the years, and we've always kept the leftover wood. I mean, not the treated wood, but like if we ever dismantled something that was made out of 2x4s or cut it up. So like I redid my deck 4 or 5 years ago, and it was a cedar deck. So I just cut up all the wood that was the old cedar deck and have just been burning it. Cedar is another one that is very quick burning kind of thing. And it's like, okay, so there's a real temporary, like the Song of Fools, he talks about the listening to the Song of Fools is like this quick burning. Yeah, it flares up, but then it's gone. Whereas the rebuke of a wise man, the rebuke of a wise person, wise man, wise woman, is something that should last longer than simply just, wow, these guys friends. You think about the story of and I wonder again if it's not Solomon writing this again, which I don't think it is. Kind of looking back at the story of Rehoboam, or the split of the kingdom after Solomon's death. And if you remember that story, it's in 1 Kings chapter 4. Solomon dies and Rehoboam becomes the king. So he's the last king over the united Israel, all 12 tribes of Israel. And he goes to his advisors and says, what do you, or they come to him and they say, look, Solomon was this to us, you should dial it back. And you'll have, the people will be, follow you, okay? And then he goes to his friends, and his friends say, no, tell him if you were harder, if Solomon was hard, we're going to be harder. So Rehoboam does, and the result is the kingdom splits. So I wonder if they're thinking about that, as whoever's writing this. I don't know, but verse 7. The laughter of fools is likened to the sound of crackling thorns on fire. That's a crackling, the sound under the pot, so it's being cooked, kind of thing. And I don't think you really get the heat, that you do out of hardwood as well. We have a wood fireplace, but we have done minimal, which is to say none, no cooking on that. Have we? We've never, no. I don't think we've even done a hot dog. Marshmallows every now and then, but I don't think we ever.
Fire pits outside, never in the fireplace.
Yeah.
Look at the face. Ooh, nice.
Well, we have two. We actually have three now. They think about it. We have 2 fire pits outside. So when I hit 30 years with Ford, my gift was this outdoor fire pit, which perhaps that was meant to symbolize that my career was going up in flames. I don't know, but because it did shortly after that. But as a matter of fact, but yeah, 30. So we have one of these round ones that kind of goes up outside. But be that as it may. So back to Qohelet. So per Qohelet in 7:7 here is extortion turns a wise person into a fool, and a bribe corrupts the heart. And I think here, verse 7:7 and following kind of reflects Qohelet's world weariness, and I talked about that earlier. And I think his point here is to just say that even the wise can be corrupted by money. Okay? Per Q, wisdom can be corrupted by money. Okay? Which is interesting because if you look back at 5:10, it says, whoever loves money never has enough. Whoever loves wealth is never satisfied with their income. Okay? And again, there are some, people that, very, very successful people that have been taken down just by a huge amount of money. I remember reading, I don't remember whether it was the book Boss by Mike Royko about Daley or the book Clout about Mayor Daley. Clout was written by a guy named Len O'Connor. Does anybody remember Len O'Connor? Yeah. Both of them were news writers, and they both wrote a book about Mayor Daley. I think it was Royko in his book Boss, where he said one of the things about why Daley was such an effective mayor was that the only thing he cared about was power. That's all he cared about. That he didn't care about money, so you couldn't bribe him. He didn't care about women. He didn't care about, all he cared about was power. That was it. He just wanted to be mayor. He wanted to have and that was why he was untouchable for the last however long he was mayor, 21 years, 25 years, something like that. But that's all they cared about, you know. And so you get people like that. But here Qohelet is like, extortion turns a wise person into a fool, and a bribe corrupts the heart. Now, what's not clear is whether the person who is extorting or being extorted, or perhaps it's both. You know, and extortion being that idea that, you know, you need to do this, or you know, I'm going to cause this pain in your life, and a bribe corrupts the heart. So again, even wisdom can be corrupted by that. Verse 8, the end of a matter is better than its beginning, and patience is better than pride. Do not be quickly provoked in your spirit, for anger resides in the lap of fools. Again, this idea comes back in James, where every man be quick to hear, slow to speak, slow to anger, kind of thing. Did I put that in there? I guess not. Do not say, why were the old days better than these? For it is not wise to ask such questions. Okay, so to a, you know, this to a history major, this verse is like, wait a minute, you know, why were the old days better than these? So what are the kind of questions, according to Qohelet, is it not wise to ask? Like these questions about the good old days, you know. And if you remember in Ezra 3:12 and Zechariah 4:9, there's this story about the rebuilding of the temple, and I think in Ezra 3:12. They rebuild the temple. So the original temple is destroyed, and then through the return after the captivity, they come back and they rebuild the temple. And then in verse 12, chapter Ezra 3:12, I'm in the passage. All the people, you know, with praise and thanksgiving, they sang to the Lord, He is good, His love toward Israel endures forever. And all the people gave a great shout of praise to the Lord, because the foundation of the house of the Lord was laid. But many of the older priests and Levites and family heads who had seen the former temple wept aloud when they saw the foundation of this temple being laid, while many others shouted for joy. Okay, so that kind of suggests that, again, and in going over, there's another similar passage in Zechariah talking about it, where it's like, okay, this is not as grandiose as the last temple. You know, this is not wow, the last temple was so beautiful and this temple is not quite. Okay, and then of course Herod comes in later on, a couple centuries later, and kind of remodels the whole thing. But that's a whole different thing. Kind of thing. So again, you know, we didn't used to do it that way. I worked with a guy once, and this was when I worked in the restaurant business. I know it's hard to believe that I was in the restaurant business, but I was. It was 4 or 5 miserable years for both myself and the restaurant business. But they never gave me a fire pit to go away. So, but I just went away on my own. But you know, in the restaurant business, you're dealing with retail workers, kind of, you know, people, minimum wage workers, and so you're constantly churning employees, not intentionally, or I mean, I guess sometimes you could, but you know, you're constantly going over employees. And I remember one of the rules of thumb was like, so an employee would be there, and he or she would leave, and then they'd come back some period of time later and want to work again. And the whole idea was, you know, you hire an old employee, you hire an old problem. You know, they left for a reason, and if they come back, chances are they come back with that same problem. You know, and you come in, or you get somebody applying, and you think, oh yeah, this person has had 7 jobs in the last 8 months. Okay, what's the problem here? Why? You know, although they say, and I don't, you know, I've never been on the hiring end of things, but they say nowadays that you know, people, the last article I saw about this said that the current generation, whatever it is, generation double B or what, I don't know what it is destined to have 3 careers in their life. Okay, 3 careers, not jobs, careers. That they're going to change, they anticipate that people will be changing careers 3 times in their life. And who knows how many jobs within that particular career. Now, whether that's true or not, I don't know. We'll find out. Debbie will find out, because she's the one that's going to live forever. But, you know, but be that as may, you know, so, but I worked with a guy once and I worked with Ford in the insurance division, and this guy had worked for Allstate. He'd actually worked for State Farm and for Allstate. He's a nice guy and all, but he constantly was talking about how the company he now worked for was not Allstate. Okay, we were in the insurance division, so that's why we constantly, oh, at Allstate we do it like this, did it like this. I was like, after a while, it's like, dude, go back to work for Allstate, will ya? Okay, this isn't Allstate. You left Allstate. You didn't like it there. Okay, and you get, anytime you get a situation where, you have a very, what's the word, a fluid group. I mean, you get people in the church. Oh, and they'll come in from a past church and they'll say, we need to do this because this is how we did it in my old church. Well, it may be a great idea. So sometimes we get really good ideas that way. But after a while, you got, why did you leave? If it was so great, why did you leave? In my old church we did it like this, or okay, why did you leave? But be that as it may. So again, and perhaps it's just, why is he world weary about this? I don't know, because there's throughout the Old Testament, there's a very visual element of the Old Testament where like when they came through the Jordan River, when the Israelites went through the Jordan River into the Promised Land, Joshua was told, put up a memorial here, put a pile of 12 stones here, and the memorial there is so that your children will see the memorial and they'll ask you, what's that? And then you can tell them, this is what the Lord did. And so there's all these kind of things throughout the Old Testament where this whole this visual way of teaching is do this so that when your children see it, you can tell them about that kind of thing. And so that's one of those, key parenting tips or things. You put things out to make your kids ask questions. Okay, so don't go to the 4-year-old's birthday party with a picture of a funeral home. That's the right idea, but a wrong application of the idea. Okay, but be that as it may, wisdom. I'd say, verse 11: wisdom, like an inheritance, is a good thing and benefits those who see the sun. Okay, that would be the living. Seeing the sun is the living. Wisdom is a shelter as money is a shelter, but the advantage of knowledge is this: wisdom preserves those who have it. Okay, so wisdom and money, that should be money, not Monday. I just now realize that is an error on my part. I don't know. Wisdom and money can both be a shelter, but wisdom is better. Okay, wisdom is better. Or wisdom and knowledge, I think he's using wisdom and understanding, wisdom and knowledge interchangeably here. Okay. Consider what God has done. Consider what God has done, verse 13. Who can straighten what he has made crooked? When times are good, be happy. But when times are bad, consider this. Now hold this thought for a second. Again, who can straighten what he has made crooked? Well, the answer to that is no one. And again, this is repeating something from chapter 1, beginning with verse 5? The wind blows. I know it's here somewhere. Wait, I made a note of it. 1:15, verse 15. Chapter 1, verse 15. What is crooked cannot be straightened. What is lacking cannot be counted. Okay, this is he's talking about, we can't, in chapter 1, Qohelet is saying, listen, we can't change this. And here Qohelet is reminding us, who can change this stuff that's bent? Only God can. When times are good, be happy, but when times are bad, consider this. God has made the one as well as the other. Therefore, no one can discover anything about their future. Okay? Now, this is kind of an interesting idea. It's like, we look at things and we see if something good, it's part of the personal attribution error. It's kind of a variation of the personal attribution error. That when something good happens to us, you've won the lottery, Great. Or so you got the job of your dreams or whatever. We call that a blessing, right? God's really blessed me. We call that a blessing, and say, well, it's because God has blessed us for whatever reason. We prayed for it, we asked for it, whatever, God has blessed us. And when something bad happens to us, we look at it and say, God is testing us. Okay, so like you're driving to church and you get behind Dave Morrill driving to church. You're like, okay, I'm being tested here. No, I'm just kidding.
That's a bad example.
Yeah. Okay, you're driving to church. You're driving to church and Dave Morrill is behind you. Okay?
Could be a problem.
There it's like, God is testing me kind of thing. And it's just, I'm always intrigued by that, right? I mean, we do this. And we don't think that, okay, well, that blessing is just as much a test as anything else is. How are we dealing with the blessing? What are we doing with this good job? Are we taking advantage of it to the glory of God or not? Okay, and here Qohelet is now. Again, this is Qohelet may be looking at this again from the deistic point of view. It's like, well, God had no more to do with one than he did with the other, or God had as much to do with the one as the other. Why do we look at this one this way and that one that way? Okay, but therefore no one can discover anything about their future. Okay, except for the fact that Debbie will be living forever. We know that. That's the case. Per Q, God made both the good times and the bad times. Okay, and really what this is, let me go back down. Therefore, no one can discover. In this meaningless life of mine, that is his life under the sun, Qohelet's life under the sun, kind of taking, and again, he's just sort of stepping back and saying, okay, here's a kind of a big picture statement. I have seen both of these, the righteous perishing in their righteousness and the wicked living long in their wickedness. Okay, has anybody seen this in their life? Has anybody, like, why do gangsters die of old age? Right? So you'd think, right? But this is what's called the retribution principle. Okay, and this is kind of the basis of the entire book of Job. And the retribution principle, and it kind of touches on, is the idea that the good are rewarded and the wicked not. Okay, so, and conversely, if you are rewarded, okay, so if the good are wicked, and if the good are rewarded and the wicked are not rewarded, then if you are being rewarded, you must be good. So Job, who's living in a time period where that's a very common understanding, suddenly loses everything. Okay? There is no way you can look at that and say, Job's being rewarded. He's being punished. He clearly is being punished. And so he's got 4 friends who come in and try to explain to him, dude, you really screwed up somewhere. And Job's like, no, I didn't. That was the summary of 9/10 of the book of Job, right there. Okay? We could go to a lot more detail, but basically, you did bad, no, I didn't. You did bad, no, I didn't. Kind of thing. But that's what the retribution principle is. In John chapter 9, when the apostles and Jesus walk up on the blind man, what do they say? Who sinned, this man or his parents? There's no way being blind can be seen as a blessing, so therefore it's a curse. Therefore somebody must have done something wrong. That's the retribution principle. Okay? And again, and this, this is, to me, this is just human nature to think this. I mean, if you see somebody that was able to buy a nice house, I mean, do you really, you may make a joke about it, but do you really think, wow, I wonder what illegal activity he's been up to for the down payment? Okay, we don't, we think, oh, what a blessing. You've really been blessed. And when you suddenly discover that somebody is down and out, is your first thought, or somewhere in there, you think, oh, yeah, I wonder, I wonder if they're right with God. You ever think that? I mean, I think we all do. No, you don't have to confess it at this point. Okay? But it's like we kind of think, I wonder, somebody stops coming to church and then you hear that they were arrested. What do you think? You think, oh, well, what do you expect? Right? We do. We all do. Right? Okay. Now, and here, I mean, Job is like to say, no, that's not how it works. That doesn't mean that God can't bless you, you know, and with things, and God clearly does. And it doesn't mean that you have license to go out and do whatever you want to do. And because, you know, God's going to do what God's going to do. It just means that you and I can't look at somebody and assume that because he or she is prospering, that they are right with God, or that because he or she is suffering, that they're not. Yes?
Would you say that the difficulty comes in that the retribution principle is often true, but it is not always true?
I would say that God rewards those. I hesitate to just elevate it to the point of it being a principle. That's my hesitation. That God will reward people for being faithful, and He clearly does. But once you say it's a principle, then that's kind of like, okay, I can bank on that. All right. And again, I mean, there are stories of people who are very, you know, I mean, we know a family who had two sons, and one son went to Moody Bible Institute and was youth minister in a church, was serving the Lord. The other son went to, fell out of the way and ended up, you know, in prison. Okay. Both sons died, independently of each other. Both sons died. So it's like, you think about that for a while. It's the same home, two sons, one goes right, one goes left, you know, one turns out right, one turns out wrong, both die. It's like man, you know. And it,
right in with the book of Ecclesiastes.
yeah. Yeah.
Isn't there a scripture passage that says, you're blessed if you're poor, and you're blessed if you're rich? Am I remembering exactly?
Blessed are the poor.
Well, there's blessed are the poor in spirit. It's one of the Beatitudes.
And I was thinking, some passage, I'll have to look it up because I don't remember.
I don't know, it might be in Ecclesiastes 9 or 10. We haven't gotten that far yet. Yeah. But
I'm gonna look it up.
The rain falls on the rich and the poor.
so Qohelet has seen that the retribution principle is not true. That it's not a guarantee, I guess perhaps might be a better way to put it.
In this world.
In this world, yes. That it's not a guarantee. Okay? Again, you've got the old song, "This world is not my home, I'm just passing through. My treasures are laid up somewhere beyond the blue," kind of thing. Okay? Now Qohelet is, I don't know, then he gets into this weird, do not be over righteous, neither be over wise. Why destroy yourself? Do not be over wicked and do not be a fool. Why die before your time? Okay? So again, Qohelet, this is one of the, again, Ecclesiastes is not the book that you're going to get life verses from, and this is certainly not one of them. Of all the verses not to choose for your life verse, this is one of them not to choose. Didn't want to get lost in the negatives there, kind of thing. But again, Qohelet is looking at life, you know, I got it all. I was like, yeah, what's the point of being over rich, or over righteous? What's the point of being over wicked? Then he gets down, why die before your time? It's good to grasp the one and not let go of the other. Whoever fears God will avoid all extremes. Another way to translate that is, if you have an NIV, you see down at the bottom, it says, whoever fears God will follow them both. Will follow, okay, wait a minute, Qohelet, what? Is this the best wisdom you've got in this deistic world view of yours? Oh yeah, I guess. You know, do I recommend this? No. Me, you know. Because then he goes on, he says, verse 19, wisdom makes one person more powerful than 10 rulers in a city. And I typed out this question before I really did the math, and I think it's right. Wisdom makes one person 10 times more powerful than a ruler. Right? So if one person wiser than 10 rulers, then 10 times than one. Right? Is my math good? I was a history major, not a math major, so I think I'm right there. But again, wisdom makes one person 10 times more powerful than a ruler. Indeed, there is no one on earth who is righteous, no one who does what is right and never sins. So even if you wanted to be over-righteous, Qohelet is telling you, you're not going to do it. Now, if that verse sounds familiar, it's because the idea, I don't think Paul is quoting it, but I think the idea certainly comes up in Romans 3. For all have sinned and come short of the glory of God. In verse 21, do not pay attention to every word people say, or you may hear your servant cursing you. Okay? It's kind of like, oh, I want to know what happened. No, you don't. I want to hear this conversation. No, you don't. Kind of thing. For you know in your heart that many times you yourself have cursed others. This is kind of an interesting thought. And again, it kind of gets into how we talk about others, if you think about it. And there's a principle that people tend to forget, and this is one of the reasons why gossip and that kind of thing is so bad, that the way people talk about others in front of you is the way they're talking about you in front of others. So it's like, and it never ceases to amaze me that, and again, since I've been out of the I wouldn't say the work environment, but where I had a boss who just loved to share stories about the failings of others. And I'm like, I know, and I realized this guy was like, hey, this guy is just all he can talk about is how this is the boss. Okay, this is one of the reasons why I retired when I did. They say people don't leave jobs, they leave bosses. But it was like, this guy had a story about me that I kept hearing. Oh, you got to tell me about this. What about that? Well, Bob said you did this. I'll tell you some other time. It has to do with avocados. Okay? But, Bob said you do this. I'm like, well, why don't you just go? And I kept, at the end, I'm like, just go ask Bob. That's his favorite story. I don't want to take away from him his fun. Didn't really care for this guy by the end. It's like, go ask Bob, let him tell you the story. He's the one that's more interested in it. But again, it's like, for you know in your heart that many times you yourself have cursed others. Why do we expect others to, what makes you think that if you're sitting there talking about what a terrible person Stan is, that, or what a terrible driver Dave is, what an aggressive driver Dave is, behind his back, that I'm not going to say, I'm sorry, well, go on. Were you in a white pickup truck on the way to church today? No, I'm just kidding.
Are you smiling?
Yeah, because I'm guilty. Yes. So, all this I tested by wisdom, and I'm just going to move on. I am determined to be, I'm going to edit this part out of the video kind of thing. That's the beauty of the whole editing process. I am determined, all this I tested by wisdom, and I said, I am determined to be wise, but this was beyond me. Whatever exists is far off and most profound. Who can discover it? So I turned my mind to understand, to investigate, and to search out wisdom and the scheme of things. Okay? So I am determined to be wise, but this was beyond me. This kind of reminds me of the, in Psalm 139, where David is like, such knowledge is too high for me. I cannot attain it. Okay? But actually here he's just kind of reapplying. He's kind of reminding himself, this is what I'm here to do. So I turned my mind to understand and to investigate and search out wisdom and the scheme of things. How and why things work. I'm always fascinated by that, how things work. I mean, how organizations work. Who's in charge? Who's making the decisions? How does that process operate? Who do you need to talk to? That kind of stuff. I'm just intrigued by that sort of thing. But to investigate and to search out wisdom and the scheme of things, and to understand the stupidity of wickedness and the madness of folly. The stupidity of wickedness. If I was ever going to write an autobiography, I might. No, I'm just kidding. But Q tries for wisdom but misses, verse 23. So he settles for understanding of wisdom, the scheme of things, how things work, the stupidity of wickedness, and the madness of folly. And I think, this is coming from Solomon or somebody ostensibly trying to sound like Solomon. This is like a wow. Solomon, dude, what were you thinking? Okay, and, insert your own joke about the 1,000 wives here, okay? But it's like, what was going through your head? It's like, you had everything going for you. You were handed the kingdom. It was unified. God was on your side. Everything was going right. And by the end of your life, it was a disaster. Okay, and the kingdom split, right? Of course, he's gone by that time. So again, the madness of folly or the stupidity of wickedness, to me, that's just, if I was going to write a story of the life of Solomon, that's what I'd call it. But maybe we'll talk about Kings, Samuel and Kings some other day. I'm going to kind of get through this chapter. I find more bitter than death the woman who is a snare, whose heart is a trap, and whose hands are chains. The man who pleases God will escape her, but the sinner she will ensnare. Now, interesting here. Now, is Qohelet a misogynist? Yeah, a little bit, I think. And if he is, maybe he's blaming the 1,000 wives he had for his downfall. And again, insert your own 1,000 wife joke here. But still, it's like, Solomon, you had a little agency there. You're the king, right? You had a choice. Okay? And it could be, now looking at this, he realizes, first of all, that either a woman or women can be a snare. Okay? A woman or women can be a snare. Now, he could be talking about women in general. Women, they're going to get you. Now, if you're going to a party for a 4-year-old boy, now that would be something to talk about. Women, stay away from them. They'll take all your money. Okay? Except for Debbie, of course.
It's going to be a long ride home.
Yeah. Nah, she's used to this. So, or it could be talking about a particular type of woman. Sort of like in Proverbs chapter 9, where it says folly is like a prostitute. It's talking about like a particular type of woman is a snare. But the man who pleases God will escape her, but the sinner she will ensnare, kind of thing. Okay, so he more likely to me is talking about a particular type of woman. Look, says the teacher, again. Suddenly, Qohelet is in the third person. Here we have the framed narrator. Now, why the framed narrator suddenly makes a reappearance here, I don't know. There isn't really a good explanation. It's just all of a sudden, the speaker is referred to in the third person. Okay? Look, says the teacher, this is what I have discovered. Adding one thing to another to discover the scheme of things, while I was still searching but not finding, so again, he's not very successful in his goal, I found one upright man among 1,000, but not one upright woman among them all. So, according to Qohelet, and this is missing, I wrote it in, per Q, this third from the bottom, one man of 1,000 is upright, but not a single woman is. Okay? Now, this is Qohelet perhaps talking about out of his experience. Okay? And it is certainly this, again, if you're going to choose a life first, don't choose this one. This would be a bad one. I found one upright man among 1,000, but not one upright woman among them all. Now, again, all this is just telling, again, this is just Qohelet telling, this is what I found.
And how many wives did he have?
Solomon, 1,000 is the number I...
So he knew a lot of women.
He did know a lot of women. Not one of them upright, apparently. I'm just what the...
I just thought a thought about that. I thought it was 900, and maybe it's 1,000. But anyways, plus or minus 100.
Once you get past 2, does it really matter?
In those days, the convention was for kings to marry the daughters or relatives of other kings to bond some kind of treaty between them. I don't know, there was 1,000 other kingdoms. harder with, but some of those women were from carnal, evil, wicked places, and he was forging allegiances with them. So that's in the mix, but I don't think it explains the whole thing, that's for sure.
Yeah. No, I don't know what Qohelet's thing here is, except to say that, wow, he's looking at life and he's got it all. Again, this is a guy who's rich and wealthy, powerful, is talking here, okay? This only have I found. So again, this only have I found. God created mankind upright, but they have gone in search of many schemes. Okay, so at least he's saying, okay, let's not blame God for this. Okay, God created man upright, but they have gone in search of many schemes. Okay, and again, like you go back to Genesis 6, where God looked down and said the only intention of the thought of their heart was only evil continuously, kind of thing. But they've gone in search, and I put that verse down at the bottom there. But finally in verse 1 of chapter 8, it says, who is like the wise? Who knows the explanation of things? A person's wisdom brightens their face and changes its hard appearance. Okay, so here is like, if you're wise, you're going to smile. Well, that would explain a lot. Why don't? There you go. Okay, never really claimed to be wise. Guilty, yes. Wise, no. And changes its hard appearance. Where now just earlier he had said that, a hard appearance is a good thing, right? So it's kind of okay, Qohelet, make up your mind here, okay? We're going to continue on. Hopefully next week we're going to knock out 8 and 9 as we talk about some of the advice that he's got for the people who are in the kingdom and the like. Any questions? All right. Well, thank you very much. I'll see you guys next week.